Hello, my name is Annette with Sunbeam Fabric Art. Welcome to my channel. Recently I made my son a quilted jacket at his request. I made lots and lots of hourglass blocks to make the coat. When I had the coat finished, I still had one large piece of hourglass block fabric. I decided to make myself an easy vest, so I'm going to take you along for that process. I'm using an old men's shirt as a pattern for my vest. After fiddling around with it, I decided to just cut out one side of the front. So what you see me doing is cutting out a rectangle. Then I'm using pins to hold down the shirt onto the top of my fabric so I can see exactly where I need to cut. And I did cut out a little bit extra for seam allowance. I used the one piece I had cut out, laid that right sides together on another rectangle, and cut out a piece for the other side of the front. Next, I laid out the remaining fabric right side up. I laid the back of the shirt on top of this and did the same method where I pinned around all my cut lines. As a shortcut, I pinned only 1/2 of the back of the shirt. Once I had that cut out the way I wanted it, I was able to remove the pins and fold the fabric over and cut out the other side. The back of my vest is going to be a little bit shorter than the front, so I did dig a scrap of strips out of my scrap bin to use later. I decided to go ahead and stitch my shoulder seams together, and then I also added on that scrap strip to the bottom of the back. When I make my next quilted vest, I will do the back and the front separately for the quilting. Trying to quilt this, adding my backing and my lining, it was very awkward because of the angle of those shoulder seams. They kind of went out at a funky angle. So I ended up having to do the batting in separate pieces just to get it to lay right. I used extensive pinning as I added the batting. I had a lot of this green backing fabric. It was a 108 that I bought tons and tons of when I was finishing a whole lot of charity quilts. I have lots and lots of this green fabric left, and I thought this will make a perfect lining for my vest. So little by little, I built my vest quilted sandwich with the front, the back, the lining, and the batting in the middle. I went around the whole project and trimmed away batting, about a 1/2 inch from the edge of all the fabric. That way my seams would not be so bulky. To quilt this, all I did was use zigzag lines over my seam lines. Here's a little close-up of how that stitching looks on the front and the back. Once all the quilting was done, I removed all the pins. Then I trimmed all the way around this, just trimmed that lining back to match the quilted vest fabric. Next, it was time to sew the side seams. For those seams, I decided to use the French seam technique. So what you're going to see me doing is putting the lining sides together. I'm going to stitch this seam. I always try to take a look at the seam that I just stitched in these kind of situations, just to make sure there's no raw edge poking through. Once I confirm that seam looks good, I'm going to go ahead and trim pretty close to my stitch line, about 1/8 of an inch. Next, I flip this around so that seam is now right side fabric together, lining side out. I make sure that I'm stitching down this side seam again, making sure that any raw edges and that previous seam width are inside my second seam. And don't forget to check that seam after you stitch it. On my second side seam, I did run across some raw edges coming through, so I had to take it back to the sewing machine and stitch it a little farther in before I finished it. After trimming around all the edges, I'm ready to put some binding on. I'm using some 2.5 inch black strips from my stash. I did not fold this binding in half. I'm leaving it open. I'm stitching it to the inside, to the lining. I started up one side of the front opening and stitched all the way around to the opposite side. Next, I folded over that binding a couple of times till I thought it looked good, and then I clipped it down to the front. Then I stitched it in place all the way around. Next, I did the same thing with each armhole, and I've got to say the armholes were the hardest to add the binding to. And to avoid raw edges, I just folded the ends of the fabric over so that there was a nice folded edge. And last, I added the binding to the bottom edge of this vest. I went back over some of the binding with decorative stitching. Here is a look at my quilted vest. Well, I did wear this vest to Missouri Star Quilt Company's Birthday Bash 2024 up in Hamilton, Missouri. While I was there, I picked up 5 little buttons that I thought would look cute on my vest. So when I got back, I added these buttons to my vest. I actually have a button foot for my machine, but sometimes I'm just too lazy to go dig it out and switch the foot, so I just used my regular foot for this. I used a little ruler to check the distance of these buttons. I'm measuring from the center of one button to the center of the next button, and I set them about 3 inches apart. And there you have it. I trimmed away all the excess thread from these buttons. And now my vest looks a little bit more special than it did before. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I hope to see you back again real soon.